What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our SEC channel. We're going to preview the 2024 schedule for Ole Miss, break it all down for you. Before we get to that 2024 schedule, let's look back at 2023. Here is the schedule for Ole Miss last season, and only two losses, Alabama and Georgia. Of course, had a pretty close call against LSU. Even that Auburn game was pretty close, but they were able to win those games and have a great season. And again, they had a tough schedule. They had Georgia out of the East, but luckily they got Vanderbilt. Those days are over, though. We won't get Vanderbilt every year anymore, or at least unless they do some kind of locked rivalries and they do wind up playing Vanderbilt. But it looks like they're not going to be playing Vandy every year. We'll see, again, how all that plays out into the future. But you lose that game against Vanderbilt potentially, and then you add potentially Texas or Oklahoma. So obviously the conference schedule is going to get tougher. And then you look at who they played in the non-conference. Tulane, who was a good team. Georgia Tech, who wound up being a decent team. Two teams there. And then easy games against Mercer and ULM. So let's look and see if this 2024 schedule is going to be tougher or easier than last year's schedule. You can see right away the non-conference schedule is pretty easy. Furman, Middle Tennessee, on the road at Wake Forest and Georgia Southern. Wake Forest just doesn't quite seem to be what they had been. They finished at the bottom of the ACC last year. Really difficult season. It's hard to imagine Ole Miss having much of a challenge in that game. So you get a pretty easy non-conference schedule there. No big time matchup. And again, I would say last year's was tougher with Georgia Tech and Tulane. And so let's look at the home schedule. Furman, Middle Tennessee, and Georgia Southern in that non-conference. And then Kentucky, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Mississippi State. Those will be the games in the SEC at home for them. Georgia at home is going to be a big one. Oklahoma is going to be a big one. Kentucky, that could be a competitive game there as well. And of course, the Egg Bowl, always tough. So it's nice to have those four games at home. Let's look now at the road schedule. Mentioned Wake Forest, and they'll also play South Carolina, LSU, Arkansas, and Florida. I tell you what, this works out really well in my opinion, because I think Ole Miss is good enough that they should be able to handle South Carolina, Arkansas, and Florida even on the road. If this Ole Miss team is a top 10 team like we expect them to be, those are three games you don't mind playing on the road. I know those can be tough places to play, but you feel like Ole Miss still has a great chance. They should be favored by a lot in those games. But then, of course, LSU, that one will be really, really tough. Maybe you'd want to switch LSU and Kentucky. If you had LSU at home and Kentucky on the road, then how favorable would this schedule be? But again, overall, the schedule is pretty favorable for Ole Miss. And they start with Furman there on August 31st, week 1. Then they'll play Middle Tennessee the next week, at Wake Forest on the 14th, and then Georgia Southern on the 21st. Close out the month of September with a home game against Kentucky. A very manageable month of September there in those first 5 games. Only one road game, and again, a very winnable game against Wake Forest. And then they get South Carolina on the road on October the 5th. Back-to-back road games, though. South Carolina and LSU. Something we haven't really seen a lot of with these schedules is back-to-back road games, conference games. But they've got that with South Carolina and LSU. That's LSU game is going to be tough. The second of a back-to-back there on the road, that'll be a tough one right there. And then they get a bye week after that game. So maybe you'd like that first bye week to be before LSU. Would have been a little bit better, but they get the bye week after LSU. They get Oklahoma at home, and then it's on the road at Arkansas on November the 2nd. Then it'll be Georgia at home on the 9th, and then a late season bye week after Georgia before Florida. And again, their toughest 2 games, I would say right now, probably going to be LSU on the road and Georgia. They get bye weeks after those games, so they did not get very favorable bye weeks. They play Florida on the road on the 23rd of November, and then close things out with the Egg Bowl. Right, the schedule right now shows that game on Saturday, but I'm assuming that's going to be on Thanksgiving. Surely they didn't change that. But anyways, the schedule is not too tough. You get a lot of your big games at home with Oklahoma, Georgia, Kentucky, and the Egg Bowl all at home. LSU, the one really tough road game that they're going to have. I don't like the bye weeks and where they're at, and I don't like that back-to-back with those back-to-back road games with South Carolina and LSU. But again, overall, pretty favorable schedule for Ole Miss. It's definitely an easier schedule than Georgia and Alabama. So it's going to give them a shot potentially to maybe even get to that SEC championship here in 2024.